Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. Our host is integrative medicine Dr. Michael Finkelstein. Michael offers medical advice from a holistic paradigm, including both medical and metaphysical philosophies from the full spectrum of human experience. Slow Medicine Radio offers fresh ideas on how to attain a state of wellness that seems distant given the limitations of today's medical paradigm. It introduces you to thought leaders who connect the dots between theory and practice, examining health from a broad perspective with regards to medical diagnoses, conventional and alternative therapies, healthcare policy, and related topics that warrant further thought and discussion. Slow Medicine Radio does not prescribe to take this or do that. Instead, it offers an open-minded, intelligent, and practical approach to living, resulting in greater health individually and collectively. Here is Dr. Michael Finkelstein, the founder of Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York.
Welcome to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, and we're here every Monday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, and that is on 1460 AM and WVOX.com worldwide. And the mission of this program, as I always state, is try to help you be even healthier than you are. In fact, I know some of you might actually not consider yourself that healthy to begin with. So for you, then it would be how can you get from where you are to some degree of health that you've been seeking. And so today I wanted to share with you some of the work that I do in the form of providing second opinions. A lot of people come to me with an ailment. Often it's a medical diagnosis. Sometimes it's a chronic symptom or a set of symptoms, and they're frustrated because they have been to several doctors and still find themselves with the symptoms, or they still have the condition and maybe they're getting their symptoms managed somehow, perhaps with medications, but they're not necessarily entirely satisfied with the idea of taking medications for long periods of time, if not for life. And so most people, frankly, I think probably just give in to that. They don't know that there are significant alternatives, though occasionally people go to another doctor and they try to get a second opinion from there. More often than not, I think my own experience was when I was practicing conventionally, I would probably corroborate most of the diagnoses that I saw because the most common illnesses like high blood pressure and heart disease or gastrointestinal problems, nervous system disorders, and the like, frankly, from a medical point of view, are straightforward, at least from the context that we know where the disease is located or the condition is located. People may disagree a little bit on the symptomatology and the forecast for the future, and they may disagree a little on treatment protocols, but most people know they have stomach problems, and their doctors know it too. So if you've gone to another doctor along the course of the way with your own symptom set, you're probably not necessarily entirely thrilled with the second opinion because it's either going to corroborate the first or it's going to be another condition, a little confusing, and still another set of medications or treatments that you may feel that leave a lot to be desired. And so I want to talk to you, though, about another type of second opinion. Second opinion where with or without entire 100% confidence in the first opinion, meaning the disease or the condition, you look at it from another lens. You know you're not 100% as well as you could be. And so you ask the person who's going to give you the second opinion, how could I be healthier? Forget what I have necessarily, but if you looked at me right now and you looked at how I live my life and what's going on and my symptoms, are there things that you could offer me? Can you teach me about something? Can you show me a way to manage my own symptoms so that even though I may have one of several possible conditions, I would still perhaps get better anyway, even if you don't know precisely what I have? And that may be a little beyond what most people are used to. Most people feel that they need a clear diagnosis to address their condition. And in fact, a lot of people search for that diagnosis. They may not just only go to a second doctor, but they may go to many. They may go to specialists, still somewhat frustrated, still somewhat confused that nobody really knows what they have. And I'm guessing a lot of you listening fall into that category. A doctor is not exactly sure what you have, but you know you're not well. They know you're not well. And their toolbox is something that can provide you some relief, conceivably, but it's not entirely satisfying. So let's talk about another type of second opinion. And I want you to join me in this conversation because I think many of you out there may have your own story to tell, a story that other people will relate to about how you did go from doctor to doctor to doctor. You're still not sure about what you have, and you're still not 100% confident about what recommendations you're receiving in terms of how to treat it. So you are the type of person I want to help. This is what I do now in my practice, is I help those people who still have a lot of questions. They're not entirely satisfied with what's known and the recommendations to deal with some of the symptoms that they have. So the number, if you want to call me and share your story, is 914-636-0110. So it's 914-636-0110. So let's start off. So I'm going to guess if there are 100 of you out there, that 90 of you are going to have one of these conditions. That is, and I'm going to list them: chronic pain, fatigue, which would include lethargy, malaise, sleeplessness, low energy state. The third would be digestive tract issues, maybe irritable bowel, gastroenteritis, colitis, diverticulitis, inflammatory bowel disease, ulcers, indigestion. The fourth is vascular disease. So that collection would be inclusive of heart and circulatory issues, high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, respiratory problems, asthma, allergies, frequent bronchitis, emphysema, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Sixth category is mood disturbance, depression, anxiety, or other dysthymic conditions. Seventh is immune system disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, other chronic infections, or autoimmune syndromes. And the eighth would be cancer. And I would throw in there neurological stuff that would include our concern, if not the symptoms of memory loss and Alzheimer's. So my guess is that if you have a condition, it's going to fall into one of those categories. In my book, Slow Medicine, I collectively call them the big eight. And the reason I do is not because they're necessarily going to imply the same seriousness for all people, but they do have one thing in common. All of those conditions have one thing in common. And that's the basis for the second opinion I'm going to give you. One thing in common that all of those conditions have is inflammation. Whatever the cause of any of those ailments are, let's say chronic infection, you obviously had the infection. Let's say Lyme disease. You were bitten by a tick. It conveyed the tick-borne illness Lyme, and you have that infection. But a lot of the syndrome that you have subsequent to the initial infection, the reason people have chronic Lyme disease, and the reason that their immune system perhaps struggles with it, is there's an inflammatory component that seems to be driving the symptomatology. That's not allowing that person, as opposed to other people who get bitten, they get a course of antibiotics, and they get well. But the people who don't get well have something else going on, and it's inflammatory. Doctors now understand that heart disease, heart attacks, atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries. In the inside of the artery, what's going on is inflammation of the vascular lining that causes cracks and calcium deposits, and then causes a certain degree of rigidity, and eventually platelets stick to exposed areas of irritated vascular lining, plugging it up temporarily, and that impedes blood flow, and that's what causes a heart attack. But that's an inflammatory process. Yes, you may have genetics. Yes, you may have eaten your share of unhealthy fats. Yes, you may have a sedentary lifestyle. But the bottom line, the fundamental cause for the syndrome, after all those things come together, is inflammation. Why is that important? The importance is because in the second opinion I want to give you, if you consider the value of understanding how inflammation works in your body and what you can do about it, no matter what your condition, you can probably cool it off. And that's critical. This doesn't mean that you will be completely free of the condition, but you might find a tremendous resolution of symptoms, along with that, less medication requirements, and a more optimistic future outlook in terms of what's going to happen during the course of that syndrome. And I wouldn't put it past the possibility, and I've seen it many times, where people actually resolve the condition. Because if the inflammatory component is not just sort of a secondary reaction, but is primary, which it is in many of those conditions, let's say indigestion, let's say a lot of the chronic pain syndromes that people experience when it comes to their musculoskeletal system from the result of injuries, even the condition of fatigue, many respiratory problems like asthma often have such a strong inflammatory component that if you address the inflammation well enough, even with the same setup, the same genetics, the same tendency, even with years of background to this, meaning your own symptomatology, I've seen people resolve that condition. What's interesting about this and very important about it as well is when you understand inflammation and you learn how to address it, not only do you help whatever symptom complex you may have started with, for which this is an interesting conversation now, but when you think about prevention, when you think about longevity, when you think about the other things you're interested in, like not getting some of the other diseases on that list, you actually do yourself major service. This has tremendous implications for our health. This is, in essence, what so many people who are in integrative medicine talk about when they consider prevention, is the way to help people understand how their choices in life, their lifestyle, has such a great impact. Even when their genetics are strong, even when the past 20, 30, 50 years of their life sort of dictate a certain situation of the moment, there's still tremendous possibilities for people to go from wherever they are, whatever symptoms they have, whatever concerns they have in terms of what they might develop, and get to a place with a better outlook. I want that to settle in for you right now. I want you to think about all of this. I'm going to give you the number again because I would very much like somebody to give me a call. And let's start this conversation off with something specific. And that number again is 914-636-0110. And you're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. And when we come back, we'll continue this conversation on the Big Eight and inflammation. Stay with us.
You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to providing community-centered experiential and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York. And they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX.
Well, welcome back to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein. And we've been talking about the Big Eight in chronic inflammation. And what I would say is lifestyle medicine. So here are the Big Eight again. Chronic pain. That would include, for instance, headaches, migraines, arthritis, backaches, joint pain, muscle pain, neurological pain, menstrual pain, long-term, short-term pain. Then we talked about fatigue, digestive tract issues, vascular issues, respiratory problems, mood disturbance, immune system disorders, and cancer. Yes, even cancer is now understood, a lot of it, to be inflammatory. In fact, the inflammatory system that we have that responds to injuries of various forms, and I'll describe that in a second, is very closely connected to our immune system. And so the first thing that our body does when it perceives an injury, let's say, as an example, you twist your knee. And you know what happens? It sort of in addition to the pain you feel, let's say, from the tearing or the rip of tissue, but then shortly after you see the swelling. That swelling, what is that? That's fluid that's going into that area where tissue is damaged. And that tissue releases certain types of compounds, that tells the blood vessels in the area to get leaky. Leak out some of your fluid so that I can provide an immediate cushion, like a splint, to this area. In addition, other chemicals release, and they try to recruit, essentially increase the amount of circulation to the area so that that area is flooded with antibodies, white blood cells sometimes that deal with infection that come along with injuries, clotting factors, other things that go along. So depending on the type of injury, it's pretty, can be pretty specific, but the general component that you're all familiar with is blood vessel recruitment, which because when you look at an area that's been injured, it turns red. Now, why is that? Because there's more blood flowing to the area. So you got fluid leaking out of the blood cells, the blood tract, and blood vascular supply increasing to an area of injury. That's the initial response, and you know that every time you twist your knee, it gets red and swollen. Well, let's say, in addition to that, there was a bruise associated with it. Now you see the coloration of your skin, black and blue, turning yellow and green. This is the leakiness, what happens when the red cells spill out of the blood vessels. Eventually, those red cells break up, and the pigments that are in the blood that make blood red leak out, and eventually they oxidize, meaning they get in contact with oxygen, and they change colors over time. This is all part of the inflammation response. Those blood vessels leak for a reason, not just because they're torn, but in your blood, there's a molecule called fibrin. It's a protein, essentially, that is the building block for new tissue. And so when you're injured, your body is already starting to heal the injury by leaking out this early substrate, which will eventually be the building block for the repaired new tissue. And this all happens, obviously, without you thinking about it. That's a physical, mechanical injury. But when you have an infection, there's a similar process. Let's say the infection is in your lung, call it pneumonia. One of the hallmarks of pneumonia is productive coughing. Fluid, mucus gets secreted and produced because that mucus has a lot of white cells, and those white cells are designed to go to an area where the body recognizes there's an infectious process. There's more blood that goes to that area to not only bring those white cells, but to eventually clean up the mess. It can take a week or two or longer to heal. So this is going on all over your body all the time. Fortunately, our body has this mechanism built in. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to direct it. And for many of the times in our life that we've been injured or infected, we heal uneventfully. But let's say there's an injury that is chronic. We continue to re-injure an area, or the injury is severe enough, or the infection recurs, or we have a immune syndrome. Let's say we're allergic to pollen, and it keeps coming every spring, and we keep getting doses of it, and that injury and the inflammation and the mucus material, which includes not only the white cells but some acid, starts to wear out some of our nice mucous membranes. Over time, you can see how your body accumulates this chronic inflammation. But what's interesting and useful for our conversation is there's still a way, even though it has to happen this way. Like if you twist your knee, you can't necessarily entirely prevent it. But when it gets into the chronic phase, sometimes the chronic phase is triggered by ongoing subtle injury. Or, and here's where I want you to pay attention, or let's say you feed yourself, and we're going to talk literally about food, but let's say you feed yourself foods or live a life that itself is inflammatory, meaning you're putting into your body more things like inflammatory fats or the way stress affects your body. And you're not balanced in the way you are experiencing and receiving and over time the quantity of that. This inflammatory process may be more intensified and long-lasting in you. And so what if you, understanding this, maybe we can't go back in time and prevent the injuries or the initial insults, but we can cool off And that's the phrase that I used before because I think so much of this is beneficial to be conceptual. I don't want to get too technical, but I want to give you enough information so you can visualize it. Because when you visualize what's going on, at least in my experience, people don't have to memorize the recommendations. It becomes common sense. Oh, I see it now. I see how blood and fluid and blood cells contribute to this pooling of stuff which is continuously perpetuating some sort of inflammatory process in one part of my body or another. So it could be a joint, it could be my lung, it could be my blood vessels, it could be an organ, it could be when a cell first divides and is technically a cancer cell, and if your inflammation state is great enough, it may be conducive to that cell growing more rapidly, or it may impair your immune system to sense that early cancer cell and get rid of it before it becomes a disease. And so you can change what happens in your body by tuning up or down the inflammatory process. And this is where lifestyle medicine really counts. Because there are things you can do and that you're doing every day, some of which you don't necessarily think about so much, some of which you've heard in the form of recommendations from other people, but maybe you didn't appreciate why it's so important. Maybe you said, yeah, not realizing that the difference between you being symptomatic and not symptomatic is this. So let's break it down. Let's talk about the areas that you have control over. And by the way, call me if you'd like. The number is 914-636-0110. 914-636-0110. Stop me if I'm getting too technical or you're confused or you want me to repeat something. Or share your story, ask your questions, all of that. Love to speak to you. Because I like to help you. And I think, very often I hear people saying I like to help other people too. I went through this. I'd like to help other people not have to deal with what I did. So that's another good reason for you to share a little bit of what you have on your mind today to make this more of a community process conversation. We can help each other. So we're going to talk about diet. I'm going to talk about food because foods fall into essentially two categories in this context. One is inflammatory and the other is anti-inflammatory. So to make it simple, I'm going to break food into two categories and I'm going to explain what those are. I'm going to talk about stress. I'm going to talk about what's on your mind when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel particularly put upon, when maybe your part of this might be, are you resting well? Are you able to recover? Are you able to maintain sort of a certain amount of tranquility so even though the stuff still happens in the world and in your life, it doesn't necessarily always have to tip you over. So stress is a big deal. I want to talk about movement, not exercise, but what happens when you're stagnant, when your energies are stagnant, when your body's stagnant. I think you know the answer there. It's not good for your body. But there's an inflammatory component to being sedentary because our body needs the motion. It needs gravity. It needs to be squeezed here and there to circulate properly and get out some of the debris. When the debris isn't moved out of joint spaces, when it isn't coming up our legs from our feet up into our body to recirculate, when we don't lift our hands over our head, when we don't move our neck around, we get stiff, right? And when we get stiff, that implies that not only are the muscles tightening, but all the structures around the muscles and the joints are tightening, including the vasculature, including the lymphatics, which are these drain channels. Debris collects, and that debris is inflammatory. The old cells, the old garbage from inside the cells, the body needs to clear these out. Think about what happened to your car if you didn't clear out any of the lines ever. Think about what happens to the filters in your heat and ventilation systems. Think about what happens in general when ponds don't have water moving in and out of them, what they look like. But this is what happens in your body, and it starts getting like a little rancid, a little funky. And when that happens to you, it's inflammatory. Movement, not exercise. This doesn't require an ambitious expenditure of energy. This doesn't require a new pair of sneakers even. This requires just an understanding about important movement. We're going to talk about that. So we've got diet, stress, movement. We're going to talk about rest, just general rest, what your body needs. We're going to talk about relationships. All right, so let's start. Again, the number is 914-636-0110. So diet. This is perhaps the biggest category for people. They know it because foods fall into two categories, and most people have an inflammatory diet. And that's a problem. If somebody decided right now with any one of those syndromes that I talked about, any of the big 8, just for the sake of trying it, not forever, because that gets a little scary, but if you really were committed and you wanted to know, is this guy, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, is he going to really help me? And let's say you have one of the most straightforward of conditions, high blood pressure. Okay, or let's say you have a metabolic syndrome like diabetes. These are pretty common. Let's say you went to an anti-inflammatory diet for the next couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the month of March. What's that mean? And how might that affect your life? Well, I will tell you that 80, 90, maybe even close to 100% of you who took on this diet, and this is not going to be easy, but if you did, 80, 90, or nearly 100% of you would find that your requirements for medication, assuming you're on them, will go down in 1 month. Now, when you go to a doctor, and the doctor says, well, this is the condition you're going to have forever, you hate that answer. I know that. I was the doctor who said that a lot. I saw the look on people's faces. It was very depressing. It was very upsetting. Not only do you have the symptoms, syndrome, the name of the disease, but then you take it in medication. But then if you think about it, you know that this is threatening your life a little bit. It's maybe shortens your life, or maybe it makes your life a little more prone to illnesses that are going to disable you in some way. These are not things you want. Even though medications exist to help you with some of the symptoms, you don't want this stuff. You'd rather be free of these conditions. But very rarely do physicians trained in Western medical schools emphasize how much power you have to really improve how you're going to do. And a large portion of you would get all better. That's a remarkable promise. Now, I know that a lot of people, once they hear what I'm going to describe in this diet, are going to say, well, I don't want to do that, because that's like saying, don't live your life. I don't personally believe that, but I've heard that myself, that, people telling me that, because to do this means giving up a lot of foods you might really enjoy. But I'm just asking you to contemplate trying this for a month, not forever. Not only see if this has impact in your condition for this month, but after a month, then you decide how easy or difficult it is to continue. Many of you who are right now saying, I don't even want to do it at all, but maybe I'll do it for a month, but I certainly won't do it forever, will change that view in 30 days by virtue of how well you might feel. And then you get to that 30 days and you say, well, I'm off this medication, or I'm taking half this medication. I'm feeling so good. I don't want to mess it up. You may not have felt this well in years. So maybe you can suspend judgment. Maybe you can just see if you can do it. Maybe you set this up as some sort of personal challenge. Maybe you do it, as often I recommend, with a bunch of friends, that you're not doing this by yourself. That's where the community aspect of slow medicine and the work we do at Sunraven comes in. We sort of try to help each other do this. So here's the diet. So here's the inflammation component. So foods that are inflammatory fall into just a few categories. They're easy to figure. One is processed foods. Anything that's in a box, anything that's made from flour, any type of flour, whole grain, organic, any time a grain is pulverized and processed into a flour and then reconstituted as like bread or cake or cookies, its metabolic activity, its effect on your system is very different than if you chewed a grain of whole rice, as an example. And so rice flour, maybe it's the same nutrients, but it's not the same in terms of your body. So anything processed, So that's bread, pasta, cakes, cookies, chips. That's a big category. Usually stops people right then and there. But I want to urge you to stay with this conversation and think about it. I'm going to keep coming back on it, and I would love you to call me to tell me what's so difficult. 914-636-0110. Why is it difficult to feel so good? The processed food is one. The next group is animal products. Okay, so there's basically two types of products out there. There's vegetables and animals. Anything that's not a vegetable often is an animal. Okay, so that includes meat, four-legged animals. But it also includes fowl, birds. It includes fish. It includes egg. It includes dairy. Those are all animal products. They all have, even if they're low fat, they all have quantities of fat that are inflammatory, and they all have a lot of protein. Now, this is a big buzzword in today's world. People think they need some remarkable amount of protein to be healthy. Every meal has to have protein. People go to restaurants and they say, hey, where's the protein in that? And I want to try to convince you that that is a completely overplayed hand. We need protein for sure, but we don't need to follow protein on the plate as if without it, we're going to really do poorly. In fact, quite the opposite. We overeat protein now by multiples of what we really need. You can get enough protein, so the other way of saying that is you can get enough protein from high-quality vegetables, period. Let's say that again. You can get enough protein to survive and do really well from high-quality vegetables. Okay, so let's try not to confuse this recommendation of anti-inflammatory with a nutrient deficiency that you're thinking you're going to have, because without animal products, how can you possibly survive? There's not enough protein. But it's the protein in animal products along with the fat, which is very inflammatory. Okay, so the second group in your diet is animal products. So let's stop there. If you went on a diet right now that you eliminated processed foods and animal products, what would you be eating? Well, you'd be eating a lot of vegetables. Now let's suspend all the other learning that you've had about vegetables, like potatoes are bad and root vegetables are bad and they're sugary and they're starchy. But let's just assume if you ate whole vegetables for a month, all those rules don't apply for this 1 month. And you ate a good variety of those whole vegetables, meaning you can't just eat potatoes, you can't just eat rice. You need to eat a mixture of and largely overground vegetables, green, leafy vegetables, and vegetable fruits like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers, cauliflower, broccoli. When you eat those foods that make up a salad, and you would have to eat a lot, and things you can throw in to feel a little better are nuts and seeds and avocados. That diet, I know it would take a lot for a lot of you to do it, but we'll probably get 80, 90, or nearly 100% of you to need less medications and to feel amazing. Now, with that, you need to drink enough water, stay hydrated. You may not start this cold turkey tomorrow, no pun intended. You may need to sort of graduate because this could be a little bit, I want to say a shock to your system physically, but this could be a shock to your mental state a little bit. And physically, I have to be very clear. I'm a physician and I'm responsible. If you have blood sugar issues and you're taking medications for your blood sugar, whether that's injectable insulin or an oral hypoglycemic agent, and all of a sudden your diet changes radically, you may wind up taking too much of those medications pretty quickly. So this needs to be done carefully and smartly and wisely. But I just want to present the context. And there are people you can go to for more precise advice, which is what I would recommend for you personally. But maybe you start thinking about it. Maybe you move in this direction. Maybe you cut down substantially on the processed foods. Maybe your diet for now is whole foods only, which might include chicken, which might include fish. Those are whole foods. But not include a bread, a cake, a pasta, cake or cookies. And then maybe a few weeks later, you get a sense that you can do this. Now, I'm not saying do this by itself. The second category is stress. This diet is going to make a lot of you stressed. This diet is going to, even talking about it, thinking about it, my experience is that people look at me and they sort of are freaking out to some extent because this is a lot to handle. Are you kidding me? You know, how can I do this for the rest of my life? You mean no more pizza? No more ice cream? I'm not saying that. I'm saying get to a point a month from now or a month after you start this where you feel like you haven't in 10 years, where your blood pressure may be close to normal or half of the high blood pressure you had, meaning half of the medication requirement, or your blood sugar is returning to normal. You're losing weight. You have more energy. You're more upbeat. Your stomach problems, which may not have been even the main focus of your problem set right now, if you have them, are better. Then 30 days into it, when that happens, you tell me if you really want to go back and mess that up. Of course, you know, once in a while, once you get stable, once you do this maybe for months, and now you're really in good shape, once in a while then to have a piece of pizza, slice of pizza or ice cream cake or birthday cake for your child, that's not going to throw you off as much as it does now when it's your normal diet. People eat now 3 times a day. You know, this has sort of been this sort of interesting recommendation we've heard for decades. And those 3 meals are the equivalent of what people used to eat as a Thanksgiving ritual, sacred holiday meal once or twice a year. But we're doing that 3 times a day. The amount of calories, the amount of fat, the amount of sugar. So we're not meant to handle that long term. But more than that, and even though I know how enjoyable some of those good foods are, if you have a chronic condition, which a lot of us have now or will have, and you say, is there something else? I want to get another opinion. I don't like what these doctors have said to me. Well, this is the other opinion. Otherwise, you're just getting one doctor or another opinion, and that's sort of, they sound the same, don't they? This is the other opinion. So you can deal with stress because this opinion is going to stress you out. It's going to mean a lot of radical changes in your diet. But again, do it with friends. Do it with your family that live with you. Because quite likely they need it too. You need to some extent, figure out how to deal with those emotions that come up. The state of maybe feeling deprived, irritable because this recommendation is necessary. How come I need to do it, my friends don't? The fact is that they probably do. Maybe you lead a wave among your community because they see what will happen to you. That would be good news, but you have to persevere a little bit. You have to commit to make this work. This is not a pill. This is not a quick fix. This is slow medicine. But slow medicine, like the turtle in the race, gets there. The hair is bouncing all over the place. Who knows what they get a chance to look at if they even cross the finish line. So stress, we need to talk about that. I've given you in the past this breathing exercise. Maybe we'll take a break. So I'm going to remind you of that breathing exercise. Maybe while you're listening now and you have to digest this whole situation I just told you about diet, you're going to breathe. You're going to let this settle. You're going to see if this breathing exercise doesn't help you deal with some of the emerging anger you have toward me about making even the suggestion to begin with. Let's see if you can breathe it away. So the breathing exercise is a 4-7-8 breath. 4 seconds in, which is a pretty rapid, deep breath. So your abdomen gets pushed out because you're breathing so deeply through your mid-chest into your abdomen. Then you hold your breath for 7, count to 7, let's call it 7 seconds. And then you exhale for 8 seconds, which is twice the rate, meaning slower, half the rate of how quickly you inhale. So if you breathe in 4, you exhale at 8, and there's 7 seconds in between. So it's 4, 7, 8. And then this next minute, as you're listening to the break and the announcements of slow medicine and what we do at Sunraven, see if you can't breathe that way. If you feel like give me a call, share your experience, share your concerns and questions. That number is 914-636-0967. 0110. Okay, so when I say go, you're going to start to breathe. You're going to listen to the commercial, and we'll be back in a minute. Stay with us.
You're listening to Slow Medicine Radio. You can find out more about the show and the work of Dr. Michael Finkelstein by visiting his website, slowmedicinedoctor.com. Slow Medicine Radio is sponsored by the Slow Medicine Foundation, dedicated to provide a community-centered experiential and reflective learning for individuals, families, and groups, offering educational programs, events, and resources, as well as insightful health evaluations with customized medical guidance. Dr. Finkelstein works with his wife, Robin Queen Finkelstein, at their farm, Sunraven, in Bedford, New York. And they invite you to visit and take advantage of this unique resource, including men's and women's groups and couples programs. If you think about it, much of what we experience when we don't feel well is a result of the fast world and how it affects us. Therefore, if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. Visit Sunraven, the home of slow medicine in Bedford, New York. Go to slowmedicinedoctor.com or call 914-218-3113. And thank you for tuning in Mondays at 5 p.m. right here on 1460 WVOX.
Welcome back to Slow Medicine Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Finkelstein. And finish up your breathing. The 4-7-8 breath. Settle down. So this whole idea that I've been sharing with you is a second opinion about inflammation, which is in all likelihood contributing to any symptoms you're experiencing, whether they're labeled at all by a physician, healthcare practitioner of any sort, or you just know they exist. You're just not feeling well. You feel older. Whether that's even just your body, or it could be your mood. It could even have impact in your relationships. You're just on edge. You're just not feeling settled, grounded. You're irritable. So all of those things are likely to be experienced by all of us at one point or another, and many of us experience them now chronically. It's so frustrating. And I saw that frustration when I was practicing medicine, and I was an internist, and people were coming to me, and I was telling them, yeah, you have high blood pressure, diabetes, you have cancer, you have digestive problems, you have neurological problems, you have an autoimmune syndrome. I was giving them medications. I was sending them to specialists. I was really doing what I was taught, and I thought I was doing it pretty well, and I think I was. But I was missing an understanding of something that had so much impact, which is what I'm talking to you about today. So in addition to pursuing an anti-inflammatory diet, dealing with stress, prototype of which is learning to breathe, moving your body, because stagnation is not helping you, but moving your body is a walk. It's a walk once a day. It's using all four of your limbs, though. So maybe when you're walking, you're doing something with your arms. You're really moving them up and down as you walk, or you're just maybe instead of walking, you decide to do something more total body, like gardening or dancing. There are other things that you can do where you can achieve this movement. Maybe even it's interesting and use more of your body. But walking, circulation is good. But there's two other things I want to talk about, which is, your body's need for rest and restoration, and then the impact of your relationships in all of this. Those are areas, too, where if you address these, I think you're going to get yourself very close to a feeling of greater health and well-being, and feel very much more optimistic than you are right now, at least when you leave your doctor's office. But you have more control. So rest. So you can do all these things that I advise. You can eat really well, you can breathe, you can meditate, you can do yoga, you can walk every day. But if you're pushing your body to unnatural limits in terms of how late at night you stay up, how little you sleep, that all these days flow into each other as sort of relentless, there's no break. Even if you're doing things that you might say fall into the more healthy, ideal category, you're missing out on something which is really important, which are days off. Even from a plan like this, you need a day off periodically. And I think that periodicity is every week. I think we've come into a world environment, or at least our local way of living, where 7 days a week, 365, this is the norm. People talk about it. People boast about how much work they do, how available they are, that they go days and days, weeks and weeks, months and months without really substantial breaks. That's not healthful. This is contributing. This is affecting our body's healing mechanisms. This is affecting balance. This is driving inflammation. This may even be driving our sort of cravings for food, certain types of food in particular. So we need to unplug. We need to unwind. And the most powerful thing you can do is to honor a Sabbath. That's not necessarily a statement which is purely religious, though if you have that periodicity, meaning every Saturday or Sunday or Friday or whatever day it is, you observe a sacred day in a community following scripture or dogma of any sort, that's fine. And if you include with the prayer and the contemplation a whole day around it of peace and tranquility and breaking from the normal routines, like not shopping on that day and not using electronics or as many electronics on that day, maybe not getting into your car, maybe not watching television, all those things of unplugging, where you spend the whole 24-hour period really with a day off. I don't think there's anything as a single practice that you can do that's more powerful than that, because that ties so many things together, our body, our mind, our soul. So that's what I urge. I also think that we need to consider the day-night cycle a little bit more seriously, meaning staying up late at night, sleeping so that when we wake up in the morning, we just don't feel well rested. That's a sign. That's your body telling you something. Something's got to give. And what's going to give, if you keep pushing it, because you can, is your health. And it's contributing to whatever symptoms you have, no question. So rest, nighttime, daily rest. So think about what you do after dinner. Do you really need to do it? Is it habit? Is it pure entertainment? Is it work even late at night? Is there a way for you to do less and get to bed at an hour, whatever that is, based on when you need to wake up the following day, that you're going to get 6, 7, 8 hours consistently? And the only important thing, rather than those arbitrary numbers, is that you wake up feeling well rested. What time do you need to go to bed, given that you have to wake up tomorrow morning at, let's say, 6:30? What time do you have to go to bed to feel well rested? That's your target. Then you got to think about managing your time tonight. What are you going to do after dinner? Let's say that's 7. 7 to what? Are you going to stay up till midnight? Do you think midnight to 6:30 is going to give you enough time? Do you think if between the hour of 11 and 12, just as you're wrapping up your day, you're watching some violent TV program, including the news, do you think that helps you sleep well? Now, I know you may want these forms of entertainment or even be informed with news. This is, a time where people are very interested in all of those things. But maybe you can do that another time. Maybe you realize that your health depends on what you choose. So I urge you to think about that and do that as much as you can. Maybe you commit right now to that Sabbath day, and that's the day you definitely get this type of rest. Maybe you then begin in a process. Same is true of diet. Maybe you just do it one day. Maybe you just do it on the Sabbath day, this diet that I recommended. And then you see if you can add a day. And then a couple of months from now, you add a second day, third day. So you get to a point where your weekly cycle is consistent. I think you can build yourself up to that. The results will take more time. I think you'll get less of that initial feedback that this is working than that 1 month cold turkey, or at least transition to something pretty aggressive in terms of the diet that I talked about earlier. But there's a lot of different ways you can move in the right direction. But this rest thing is really important. And I believe part of the rest is to unwind outdoors in nature, to sit on a park bench, to lie on the grass, to sit by a flowing stream or the ocean, or to go to the mountains, breathe some good air, look at the wonder of nature, be inspired. Again, not usually that costly, just to open your eyes and experience with all your senses what's going on in the natural world. But I would add that to this rest idea, because part of it is to get out of the frenzy of the fast world and into the rhythms and the cycles of the natural world. In the last few minutes, I want to talk about the last subject, which is relationships. What if in all of these things that I recommended, you have a team of people, your really closest friends or your family, that support you in this? Because, you know, what's really hard for a lot of people is to do this on your own, and then people are questioning you all the time. Hey, how come you're not eating a pizza? Hey, how come you're not available at 11:30 at night when I text you? How come, Saturday I can't find you? Well, what if those people who are most likely to do that are with you? They know exactly what you're doing, why they're not calling at 11:30 at night either, because they're also trying to go to sleep. Or on Saturday, you're walking together in the park. There's no need for the text. These are the things that you can design to make this a lot easier. The other side of it is there are people in your life who are particularly stressful in terms of the relationships you have with them. And I would say, just like diet, there are relationships that are inflammatory and relationships that are anti-inflammatory. Very often the same relationship is both. So that, think about, though, the inflammatory relationships you have that are optional. Okay, so we're not talking about really close family who are not really optional. You can't get rid of them. But there are people in your life that every time you're with, you have metaphorically a headache. Do you really need to talk to them as much or spend as much time with them? So write a list for yourself if you have to. See who's on which list and start crossing off names. Circle names of the people who in general you spend time with and you feel great. Maybe it's not 100% either way, but there are those people who are beneficial and those people who are more problematic. The people who are problematic, who happen to be your close family, this is a source of another show, but maybe there's a strategy you can adopt where you can actually improve those relationships because they're so important and you're so sensitive to them. Let's leave that there for now, but realize that there's more to talk about there. But if you started with an approach to your diet, thinking about anti-inflammation, dealing with breathing and relaxation strategies for the stress you experience, move your body enough, regularly, upper body, lower body, twisting, have adequate rest at night and a weekly day off, and then you sort of think about your relationships and find ways to minimize the impact of damaging relationships and promote those that are beneficial. I think the inflammatory process in you is going to really cool off, and that's my hope. So to support you, what we do at Sunraven, our small organic working farm in Bedford, where we invite people, is to bring you to an environment where that's what we do. We don't necessarily even talk about it. This is just how we are. So one of the things that you can take advantage of in a few weeks, on the 18th of March, for instance, is something we call a day of slow living. It's on Saturday. It's several hours, about 6 hours, where you come, we feed you, we put you in an environment which is all these beautiful things and this rest and relaxation, the natural world. We just live and walk our talk and want to share that with you. So that's available. If you want to join our community and do something that is ongoing, that will keep supporting you, then the Sunraven Garden Co-op is for you. That's a program where we might call it a CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, where people these days know I'll go to work with a farm and they'll drop off a basket once a week in healthy farm-raised food. But our garden co-op is an interactive one where you actually can work. You have the option of working on the farm, and at least once a month gather with us for a potluck lunch and some other enrichment programs like learning how to farm, learning how to live in the slow medicine way. And we start in March. The two sessions for the opening for that program are the 19th of March, and from the 19th to the 22nd is sort of when we have our enrollment, 22nd of April, that is. So I encourage you to visit our website, slowmedicine.org, to find out more about those. tonight, if you're motivated to do something right away, we have a new moon ceremony because yesterday was the new moon, and that ceremony we have monthly. The next one will be on March 29th. And then in between, one other thing, you can find me at Gilda's Club on Tuesday the 14th, where I'll be speaking to people in general who have cancer and others that support them. A lot about this, but you get to see me and we get to talk and exchange. And lastly, this Saturday in Fox Lane High School, the Bedford 2020, an organization that's looking ahead to the year 2020, trying to make improvements in the village and town of Bedford, we're going to have a table. And again, an opportunity to meet you in person. I would love to see you there. So thank you, as always, for listening. I really hope what I shared with you today makes a difference in your life. If it's overwhelming, then just bite off the piece you can, but keep staying with it. Stay with us, because I think this is the future of medicine. And we'll have more of this conversation as we go. So until next week, take care.